Good morning, hello, and welcome to the channel. Whether you are a student exploring the world of audits and compliance, or a technology professional working to secure your system, or an expert trying to navigate complex risk landscape, or part of the management team aiming to build trust and resilience, this video is for you. Today, we will be diving into topics that's critical yet often misunderstood. Service Organizations Control, or SOC, SOC. From SOC 1 to SOC 2, from financial assurance to cybersecurity accountability, SOC reports are not just checkboxes. They are blueprint for trust, transparency, and operational excellence. But here's the twist: implementing SOC doesn't have to be overwhelming. In this video, I'll break down the foundation of SOC, what it is, why it matters, and the type of reports available. We'll try to identify which SOC report fits your organization, whether you are a SaaS startup or a global financial processor. And most importantly, how you can adapt a practical, checklist driven approach to SOC implementation, which is quick, accurate, and efficient, no matter your organization's size. You will learn how to go from confusion to clarity and from compliance intent to confident execution. We'll be using structured templates, proven frameworks, and use real world insights. So stay with me as we demystify the world of SOC step by step, control by control, turning theory into action and regulations into results. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because in this channel we are not just talking about compliance, we are making it work for you. Namaskaram. This is your host Savit Vittal Salian. Let's get started. Let's look at the topics that we will try to cover. We'll start off with introduction, then we'll look at history and evolution of SOC reports. We'll look at the SOC report types and framework. We'll look at the need for SOC implementation. Then we'll dive into the technical and the structural aspect of SOC. We'll look at implementation checklist, industry use cases, its benefits, its challenges. We'll look at some of the case studies. We'll compare SOCs, the different types that we have, best practices. Then we'll look at the future of SOC and wind up with a conclusion. So that's the agenda. So let's start. In today's increasingly interconnected business environment, organizations frequently outsource critical services to third-party service providers. These providers may manage financial reporting systems, or handle sensitive customer data, or deliver technology infrastructure. As a result, trust, transparency, and assurance becomes paramount. To address these concerns, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants introduced the Service Organizations Controls Reporting Framework, or SOC framework. SOC reports are independent audit attestation that evaluates and affirms the internal controls of service organizations. These reports help organizations manage their risks, maintain their compliance, and instill confidence among its customers, regulators, and their stakeholders. This explores the history, types, structure, implementation needs, and real world application of SOC reports, especially SOC 1 and 2. In simple language, in today's world, many companies rely on outside service provider. They help manage handling customer data, running financial system, or storing information on the cloud. While this makes business faster and more efficient, it also raises a big question. How can we be sure that these service providers are doing their things safely, securely, and correctly? That's where SOC reports come in. SOC stands for Service Organizations Control. And these reports are like a health check for service providers. They are created by independent auditors who carefully review how well a service provider protects their data, how they ensure privacy, and keep their systems running smoothly. This gives the companies and their customer peace of mind. There are different types of SOC reports depending on what you want to check. Example, SOC 1 looks at how the service provider affects a company's financial reporting. SOC 2 checks if they are keeping your data secure and private. SOC 3 is a simpler version of SOC 2 that's easy to share publicly. SOC reports are especially important for industries like banking, healthcare, and technology, where trust, privacy, and accuracy are utmost critical. In this video, we'll explore the history of SOC report, what each type does, why businesses use them, how to implement them, and what benefits and challenges comes with them. All explained in a way that's easy to understand, whether you are a student, a professional, or just curious about how organizations stay trustworthy in this digital age. Let's look at the history and evaluation of SOC reports. SOC reports evolved from the need to provide assurance over the internal controls of service organizations. The initial predecessor was the Statement of on Auditing Standards number 70, or called SAS 70, introduced in 1992. SAS 70 was designed to report on the effectiveness of controls at a service organization relevant to user entities' financial reporting. However, SAS 70 had its limitations. It lacked clarity in scope and was often misused as a certification of security, even though its primary focus was financial controls. Then in 2011, AICPA replaced SAS 70 with the Statement on Standards for Attestation Engagement number 16, or SSAE 16, which introduced SOC 1. Over time, to address broader assurance needs, including data security, privacy, and availability, AICPA released SOC 2 and SOC 3 under the updated SSAE 18 and 80C section 205/320/105 in 2017. So in simple language, years ago, there was a report called as SAS 70, which is used to check if service provider had proper financial control. But it wasn't enough, especially as businesses started dealing with more data, more risk, and more technology. To fix this, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, or AICPA, introduced SOC report in 2011. These are clearer, more detailed and cover more than just finances. There are different type of SOC report for different needs. Let's look at the SOC report types and framework. This should give you a top view how it looks like. So SOC 1, the purpose is focused on internal controls over financial reporting. The users are financial auditors, user entities, controllers. The framework used in this is SSAE 18 or ACTC 320. There are two types of reports. Type 1, which describes systems and controls at a point in time. The type 2 report describes systems and tests control effectiveness over a period, generally between 6 to 12 months. In simple language, SOC 1 is for financial controls. It looks at how a service provider affects a company's financial reporting. It's common in accounting, payroll, and transaction processing, and used by financial auditors. So that's SOC 1. When you look at SOC 2, the purpose is to evaluate controls relevant to trust service criteria, also known as TSC. It covers security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Its users are clients, regulators, cybersecurity teams. The framework is ATC 105 plus AICPA Trust Service Criteria or TSC. SOC 2 also has two types of report. The type 1 is control design assessment at a specific point, and type 2 is controls design and operational effectiveness over time. Do note the difference. Type 1 is design assessment. Type 2 is operational assessment. So you test operational effectiveness in type 2. In type 1, you test the design aspect. So in summary, simple language, SOC 2 is about data protection and security. That's the space. Checks if a company is doing a good job with its security, privacy, availability, and more. It's great for tech companies, cloud provider, and data centers. Comes in two flavors. Type 1, are the right controls in place? That's the focus of type 1. The focus of type 2, are the controls working over time? So any students or expert, do note this. The concept here is first test your design. Is the design good enough, effective? And theory. But type 2 is where you test whether the design is working the way it should be. You look at the details, the finer aspect, you look at the facts on the table, you look at numbers. So that's type 2. We'll come to this again as we move forward. The next is SOC 3. The purpose is like SOC 2 but intended for general public consumption. The users are general stakeholders, customers. The format is short, it gives a high level summary, and it doesn't require any detailed testing. In simpler version, SOC 3 is a public friendly version, similar to SOC 2 but easier to read and share publicly. You can say a top view, often posted on website to show trustworthiness. Then we can look at SOC for cybersecurity. The purpose, it focuses on entity-wide cyber security risk management, very focused. It checks programs' effectiveness. That's the focus. Its audience include the executive, the board members, the regulators. In simple language, SOC for cybersecurity looks at an organization's entire cybersecurity program, not just one service. It's helpful for executives, boards, and regulators. So that's SOC for cybersecurity. SOC for supply chain. Well, it evaluates risk and controls for product manufacturing and distribution processes. That's the purpose. In simple language, SOC for supply chain focuses on the product safety and controls in manufacturing or logistics. Hope this helps you understand the different categories of SOC. While the focus will be on SOC 1 and SOC 2, these are information that could help you in your strategy. Let's look at the need for implementation. The following factor drives the adoption of SOC frameworks. The first is regulatory pressure. Well, it's dealing with the increasing compliance requirement in industries like banking, healthcare, and technology. Second is third-party risk management. It's about organization needing assurance over outsourced services. This is a big time space. Most of the organization focus on their core activities and passing on those supporting one to the third parties. Hence, we need some form of an assurance. Third is client trust. The clients today demand evidence of security and governance, something that is a cause of concern because of many missteps or non-compliances causing a client to face its regulator and pay penalties. Next is competitive advantage. SOC compliance differentiates service provider. As an organization, if you want to onboard a third party, you would choose an organization, you would choose a third party or organization which is SOC compliant rather than which is not. It gives you a assurance that the company that is you are onboarding to provide services to you is following the basics that is required. It gives you a sense of security. Next is audit readiness. It facilitates finance and IT audits. If you look at the industries, banking, healthcare, technology, all of these are super sensitive to regulations, triggers of a lot of penalties, recent negative media projections. It's all because of non-compliances. So hence, the SOC implementation is one of the key drivers to provide that assurance. So in simple language, why SOC reports are important? Well, it helps to build trust. Customer wants to know that their data is safe. It meets the legal rules. Some industries must follow strict regulations and they have to ensure that it is not only for them but also the vendors that they are getting in. It helps them to win new clients. SOC report can help companies stand out in the market. It helps to stay secure. Preparing for a SOC audit often help improve the systems. It makes audits easier. It reduces the effort during financial or IT audits. Technical and structural aspects. Well, in this, there are two aspects. One is the trust service criteria. First is security. Are systems protected against unauthorized access? That's the security aspect. Are systems accessible for operation and use? the availability aspects. Our systems processing is complete, valid, accurate, and timely. That's ensuring processing integrity. Are information designated as confidential are protected? Are they? This is to ensure confidentiality of the data. Are personal information collected, used, retained, disclosed in conformity with the privacy principle? So that's the privacy aspect of PSC. The second part is the common report elements, which includes the management assertion, description of systems, auditor opinion, test of controls and results, the SOC 2 type 2, complementary user entity controls, and complementary subservice organizations control. Now, what does this mean in simple language? A SOC report usually includes a description of the systems or services, what controls are in place, an opinion from the auditor, what are the results of the testing for type 2, what are the roles that customer also need to play, called as user entity control. For SOC 2, the main focus is on 5 trust criteria. As I said, security, which is protecting the system, availability, which is keeping the system running, processing integrity, which is making sure data is processed correctly, and confidentiality, which is protecting sensitive info, and the last, privacy, which is proper use of personal data. I hope this gives you the context on the TSC and on the common report elements. Let's look at some checklists from an implementation perspective. You can pause the screen and go through this. This should help you to kickstart your work. The first part in the checklist is planning. First, determine the SOC type. What is the scope? What are the time frames that you have? What's the objective? You need to assign ownership and need to engage a CPA firm. Now, you can break the activities into a table wherein you can make this as a first criteria, as a first section is planning. Under planning, you can put these subtopics determining the SOC type, scope, time frame, and so on. Try to fill as much as possible. Most of the information might come in from the requirement. Why someone has asked you. That would give you a lot of insight. And of course, if you have an SME in your space or a CPA firm, they will advise you which one fits you right or what's the information that you have to fill in. But from your own internal checklist, if you are preparing or perceive that in future you would have to fulfill this requirement, you can run this checklist and get prepared upfront. So use this checklist in that format. First is get your tables ready. Use this as a reference. The second phase is risk assessment, wherein you identify control objectives. What's the objective of the controls that you have? Do note, you don't have to design the control, you already have it. But first is figure out what are the different controls you have. Bring in your risk managers. They are experts, they are your specialists. Bring in the firm which you have engaged with. They will look at your process and define, look at what is the current controls that you have. Of course, you will build on it, you might refine on it, you might get new controls added, or you might be in a situation where you have to let go some of the controls, might not be applicable for this review. Doesn't mean it's not applicable for other processes. List out your risks and the trust service criteria that we discussed earlier. The next phase is gap analysis. That is, assess the current state versus TSC or ICFR requirements. It is basically current state and the requirement that you are supposed to be aligned with. That's where your objectives would also help you get that. At least where you want to reach. gap analysis is you are at point 10, you have to reach point 50. So what is the current gap that you have to fill in, what it looks like, what it means, how you are going to get that in. The next phase is control design. It is while you are reviewing it, you might find that there are certain policies that you don't have, or at least not been defined. You know it, but it's not defined. This is a time you define, you design, you articulate, you discuss with your management and your SMEs on the policies. While as an organization you will have a top level policy, you might have to refine those, articulate it more so that it is clearer. You need to have a look at the current procedures. Mostly the procedures are available, or you might have to do some tweaking or fine tuning it, align it to your target objectives. Look at your current controls. Do not jump in and start building controls. First, look at how your shop is running. Do remember, you are running the shop irrespective of SOC or not. That means there are controls and checks and balances, and if it is working fine, it means it's a good control. Only thing that you need to look at is how or which controls are applicable for your scope of requirement. Many organizations want to do it fresh for SOC. That's a risky path. Look at your controls, list out your controls, get your risk managers, your domain risk managers who are living and breathing the processes that they are leading to articulate what controls they already have. Then consolidate it at a senior level to see what are the controls, different combinations, and pick the controls which are relevant for your purpose. Next is document the systems and the CUECs. If you are running an organization for long, you would have documentation. Only thing that you need to do is relook at it from SOC perspective and see what are the bells and whistles that's missing. That's the expectation. The next is remediation. Once you identify the gaps, which you would have identified in the gap analysis, you will have to articulate how are you going to fix, what's your plan, what's the timeline, what's the technical aspect and other improvement that you are going to initiate. It might be a project in itself, but so be it, but get it documented. That's the remediation aspect of the phase. Next is readiness assessment. Conduct a pre-audit testing of controls. Suggestion is start early. This should help you in two ways. One is identifying where you stand. It also helps you in risk assessment, gap analysis and so on. Do help it from an external, preferably from a different department, or if you can afford to, get an external auditor to review it. There are many in the market who can do a great job, so you can save your resources. So doing a pre-audit is always a welcome, it's always recommended, but pre-testing is beneficial because then you know your weak links, the broken parts, because that's what gaps would be, and that's what would flow into your remediation. That would also flow into your design, because if there are gaps, it is because there is a flaw in your design or not aligned to the scope of SOC. Perform walkthroughs. Now this is something which will be done during the audit. If you remember my earlier videos on audit, you have pre-planning stages where you do walkthroughs, then you have field testings. Field testing is your design checking or the on-ground status of your design. Then audit execution. This is primarily the time when you internally believe that you are all in line and ready, and you believe that you are completely SOC compliant, and that's where you trigger, or worst case scenario, an external regulator is coming and asking you to perform it. But if it is internal, you have your own internal assessment proactively done. This helps. So if your pre-design audit is good, robust, your actual audit should be a smooth affair. So make your internal audit robust. check every aspect of your process. That's a recommended one, because if an external audit comes in and finds gap, it would not help you in your purpose. Your idea is to become compliant. Your idea is to show your regulators, your vendors, your suppliers, your customers that you are a great organization. Now, if an external auditor is coming and finding it, he need to report it. That hits hard. Rather, your internal audit should be much more tougher, more detailed, so that when an external audit comes in, you are more than 100% sure of finding yourself in compliance. The external audit will be doing the control testing and the SOC report would be drafted. Again, this is not a time where you get surprises. Ideally, your internal audit should be a place where you get all that is broken in the system and the process. Now, once the external audit is done, then we come into the phase of reporting and review. Unfortunate if there are findings, because it would be published and then you would have to track the closure of this with the external auditor. Hence, the recommendation is make your pre-audit testing more robust. Get a professional who specializes in these, or if you have an internal team, let them get all the things which is broken in the system out upfront. So, in simple language, from a phases perspective, step 1 is plan, which is choose the right SOC type, define what will be audited, hire an auditor if required to. Recommended is to hire. Step 2 is assess the risk, find areas where things could go wrong. Step 3, find the gap, see where your controls are missing or weak. Next step is fix the issue, that is to create and improve security policies and processes. Next step is do a trial run, test everything before the real audit. Then you have the final audit, which is let the auditor do their work and write the report. And the last is review and improve, which is use the results to get better each year. I hope this checklist gives you a good starting point and able to get the right team engaged. From my perspective, you have the management, which would drive the objective. You would have your internal risk team, which is focused to identify anything and everything that is broken. You'll have your controls team, which will provide the insight on the controls that is currently in place. You will have the process documentation team, which would be required to play their role in articling or what is available to share and then refine and define. And then the most important, your pre-audit team. Get a specialist to do this job. It's worth every rupee, $1. And then once you are completely shiny in your work, welcome the external auditor to perform their tests. The whole objective is not to fail and then say, oh, okay, I'll remediate. There's no fun there. It actually adds on to your workload, cost, reputation. The idea is to get it beforehand. So, recommend to invest all your resources into this aspect to get a good outcome. Industry use cases. From a banking sector perspective or BFSI perspective, they are used for third party financial processing or cloud based banking platforms, namely financial reporting, outsourced reconciliation system, specifically the SOC 1, cloud based core banking, KYC, AML services, which is SOC 2. In healthcare, it is primarily focused on patient data hosting, medical claims systems. You can say it is EHR systems, patient records, which comes under SOC 2, claims processing comes under SOC 1. In technology, it is used in software as a service platform, in cloud storage, or IT services, or you can say vendors, providers of the SaaS and the SS providers, and the cybersecurity vendors. In manufacturing, the use cases would be in the product quality and safety across supply chains. So, supply chain visibility, vendor compliances, which is the SOC for supply chain. In retail space, it comes under the payment processing, fraud detection, CRM tools. These are the spaces where the industrial use of SOC is applicable. Look at the benefits of SOC. It helps in risk reduction. In a way, it identifies and mitigates control gaps. It builds trust and assurance. This builds credibility with clients and regulators. It helps with audit simplification by streamlining clients and financial audits. It helps with operational maturity, which is primarily encouraging standardized controls and governance. It helps with customer retention, which is clients view SOC as a vendor qualification metrics. But look at it simply, it is like it improves the security by making systems stronger and safer. It builds trust, client feel more confident working with you. It helps reduce risk, helps prevent mistakes and data breaches. It helps with to win businesses. Some clients require a SOC report to sign a deal. Then yes, it saves time. One SOC report can answer many of the clients' question. Challenges in SOC compliance. Well, there are multiple challenges, primarily starting with cost and time. Audits can be expensive and resource intensive. So, having a SOC review or a SOC audit is expensive. And this is where the cost benefit analysis has to be done. If you are in a business which requires SOC compliance to be competitive, effective, I think the cost would not be more than the benefit, because you have to survive in the business. You need the SOC report to demonstrate that you are in compliance to be running in that business. Having said that, not every part of the business would understand it, not the technical team understands it. So hence the sponsorship of for SOC in the organization should be coming from the top. The tone of the management from the top should be clear on what is negotiable, what is non-negotiable. Time consuming, yes, it is going to be time consuming because it is an effort from you as an organization to prove that you are in line with the requirement and following the rules of the game to be in the game. So if you still see there is a cost and time challenge from a management, either you are not fit for the organization's objective, or the organization has some challenges in understanding their role in the business, which means most of the organizations or almost all the organizations who are serious in this business would take in that SOC as the rule which has to be followed. So yes, there would be time and the cost, but then that would be far lesser than the benefit that you gain. Next is the control complexity. Now this is something which is can be managed. This starts off with a very clear idea. If you are an organization in the business which requires SOC to be compliant, then while you are designing your processes and things, you would have factored in the TSC requirements, interpreted it, and hence defined your process. Having said that, if you are new into this space, or you are in a particular business which did not require SOC initially, but now it does, now that's the challenge that you'll have to deal with. The idea here is to get an SME who understands this space, looks at your process, finds out what's in place and what the gap is. Now, do remember what we discussed earlier, your current state and your target state. So, if you bring in an SME, this is where he will help you with. So, most of the time it is found that the controls do exist. It might just require some fine tuning or adding a layer or reducing some layers. So, it is not that you start everything with zero unless you are a new organization. In such cases, this is an effort which you will have to put up. Then there comes the third party dependency. The reliance on sub-service organization can complicate the scope, which is fact. Having said that, if you are in a business and you are outsourcing, before you outsource, before you sign in an agreement, it is always recommended to check their compliance on SOC if you need to ensure that you are SOC compliant. Avoid organizations which are not into the same game as you are. So, don't expect the organization to run the show if they don't know what SOC is or if they are not in line with SOC. If there is a commitment saying that I would get SOC compliance in 3 months, 6 months or so, but they don't have it today, recommended is don't enter that territory. It doesn't help because some of the processes might just not be in line with SOC and the third party might not be able to invest the time and commitment that is required to be aligned to the SOC, and then you end up holding a non-compliance report on your side. Hence, do not shake hands with third parties who are not in compliance already or the processes are not in place. If in doubt, the recommended approach is to get the third party vendor review externally, audit themselves, get the report, and you can review the report and see where the gaps are and get it in document as to by when those would get fixed. But then the recommendation is join only those which are already SOC compliant as your vendor. Cultural resistance. Now, this is a challenge for any old organization which is there in the business for very long and need to suddenly get SOC compliant. Now, this is something which it need to be coming from the top. There are cultural resistance. If it is at the top, then it is very difficult to navigate the ship. Hence, the first thing is why your organization requires to be compliant with SOC. Is it a new business? So, entering a new business, if it requires SOC, then so be it. Then the tone comes from the top, and then that message need to go through the hierarchy. Once that is understood, generally it is found once there is a clarity on why the organization is doing SOC or want to get aligned with SOC, what businesses we are gaining or we are entering, or which territory we are entering which requires SOCs to be in place, the resistance generally reduces and eliminates in most of the cases. Yes, you will still have some challenges, but once the understanding comes in from a business side of it, the technicals can be managed out. Next one is the evolving requirement. Now, this is a challenge across any regulators, any regulation, any act, because all as with any acts or regulations, that is all organic, means it would be a living document. New regulations will come in, new rules of the law, new acts would come in, for which you have to align with. You have to follow what has been given because that's how the regulation works. In same way, in case of SOC, the AICPA updates the TSC regularly and you are expected to be in continuous compliance. Hence, this space requires a dedicated area, people who would be constantly looking at the updates from TSC so that they can fine tune, rework, re engineer it. Because you do remember, if the regulator finds you are not in compliance to the latest one, you end up having a problem with the business that you are running. So it is prudent to keep a view on what's changing in the environment and tune your businesses accordingly so that you are in the game. So that these are the major challenges in SOC compliance. Let's look at a case study. Before the case study, we'll just do a summary again on the challenges. So basically, high cost, SOC audits can be expensive, complex controls, that's hard to understand what's required. Now this can be managed with SMEs, getting the right SMEs. Third parties, yes, you may depend on other vendors who also need to be in compliance. Resistance, staff may not like the new rules or processes. Constant change. Now that's constant change is the only constant here. It is it is something which anyone who is following any regulations need to know and appreciates it. That this is how the game is run. Coming on to the case studies now. This is a case study wherein a particular company had a challenge with clients having concern over their data security and compliance. Now, this is something which you would encounter. If you're a large organization, you would have a similar concern against your third party vendor or a partner organization. So, don't think that this is something unique. This would be regular, and every time you do business with, you would first always look at whether the other party is in the same page as you are. So in this case study, we have a company who has a concern, whose clients have a concern over data security and compliance. Now, you can be a client or you have a client. So it works both ways. The action taken by this company was they adopted SOC 2 type 2 for covering security and availability. They defined the processes, they've designed the scopes, which is in this case was a cloud platform, mapped controls, engaged a CPA firm. The result? They achieved SOC 2 compliance in about 9 months, or it could be lower. Generally, a bigger organization might require lesser time because the processes would have been much more refined. Having said that, this also helped with their sales and reduced the client onboarding time. In simple language, a startup was offering cloud based finance softwares. A big client was concerned about their data safety. The company worked with the CPA firm, improved their controls, passed a SOC 2 type audit. The result, they gained trust, won new contracts, and grew their revenue. Use this case study as an example, use the narrative as an example when you are dealing with any resistance or when you are managing the show. So either you want a client onboarded, so you have to address the concern upfront. When you are dealing with a client who's not getting onboarded, you have to check whether they are in line because you would be required to be SOC compliant. If you are entering with the bigger business, they would expect you to be in line. So you better be prepared and show the next customer or your business that you are already in line. So this is a two-way street. You can plan your strategy accordingly. Let's compare SOC types. From a focus perspective, SOC 1 focuses on financial reporting. SOC 2 focuses on security and privacy aspects. SOC 3 is same as SOC 2, and SOC for cybersecurity is specific cyber risk management. Now, if you pause here, we understand that SOC 2, SOC 3, and SOC for cybersecurity is where technology plays the biggest role. They have a role to play in all of these aspects. Whereas in SOC 1, it is about finance. It's your department which manages finance. They have to be in compliance. Having said that, do understand this. For the finance to run, they might use technology. They will use technology to complete their processes. So, hence, while in SOC 1, the major player is the financial team, there would be an IT or a technology aspect which is helping the finance department to run. So, they would have a role to play. But in SOC 2, 3, and for cybersecurity, it's purely information technology team or IT team and the cybersecurity team which would take the lead. From a user perspective, it's the financial auditors who would play a role to review whether you are in compliance to SOC 1. In case of SOC 2, you would have the clients and the risk officers and the risk teams. In case of SOC 3, it is public stakeholders because that's more of like a SOC 2 but for stakeholder management. For cybersecurity, you have the executive and the boards. If you look at how detailed these reports are, what is the difference or how depth the auditor would go in. SOC 1 and SOC 2, very high, they go into the details and almost every aspect of it's reviewed, scrutinized. SOC 3 keeps itself at the top in summary. And cybersecurity, it goes at a moderate level. Attestation is required for all four. So, in summary, in simple language, the focus for SOC 1 is finance, SOC 2 is security and privacy, SOC 3 because it is more of for stakeholders, external for your business stakeholders. So, the SOC 3, the audience is public. For SOC for cybersecurity, the audience is your executives and the boards. For SOC 1 and SOC 2, there are detailed reporting. SOC 3, as I said, it's summary only, and moderate for cybersecurity. Use cases in SOC 1, financial impact. SOC 2 is tech services. SOC 3 is for public display. And SOC for cybersecurity is cyber risk review. Hope this gives you clarity. So if there is a thought process saying which one is for me, this should give you a broad idea how the bucketing would be. I hope this helps in some way. Now, how do you have an engagement on SOC? What are the best practices? The right way to approach is top down. First is getting an executive sponsorship. It's required to secure top down buy in. Cross functional involvement. You need, as mentioned, it requires your operations, your risk team, your legal team, it requires your technology team to get involved. The next is to have as much as automation possible. Use tools for continuous control validation. You just can't run a shop if things are manual. Even if it is partial, the more of a manual, the higher is the risk, because this will get drifted over a period of time. You might be tighter during an audit, just after the audit or just before the audit. But after that, if it is manual, there are chances that we would miss. Hence, having an automated piece in place helps. Next is documentation discipline. Maintaining updated policies, logs, and evidence. Generally, larger organizations would have this. A smaller organization also are now more aware of it. But primarily, this is triggered by the penalties and the fear of getting called out in an audit. But as a culture, if this can be inculcated within the organization to have anything and everything related on processes being documented, it helps in the long run. The last is the continuous improvement. Using all the findings, gaps, and maturing your processes. Update the findings in your maturity model, in your process, in your governance helps. In simple language, you can say get leadership involved early. Work as a team, including all the teams: IT, legal, risk, and operations. Use tools to track controls automatically. You will lose when you have manual controls. Keep everything well documented. When you say everything, by nature, irrespective of SOC or any other regulatory requirement, having your process documented helps in multiple angles. One of them is knowing what your process is. Second, able to review and find gaps in it at the design level. And then when you implement those, you can check against the design. If there is a deviation, you can correct the documentation if required to. So that the next person coming on board to manage it finds it easier and he's line and there are no hiccups in the transition. These are few of the aspects. But from a SOC perspective, the documentation would be the key, because that's the first thing an audit would review. Next is learn from audit and keep improving every year. Or basically it is keeping the loop active and improving yourself. Future of SOC framework. Well, the first is integrating with a GRC tool. SOC data integrated with platforms like Archer, ServiceNow, etc., can help and will help sustaining the requirement of SOCs. Continuous attestation. Shift from point in time to real time assurance, which is primarily means it shouldn't be just before the audit or for the audit. Get your processes in place that any given point of time you need that information, you are having real time data or near real time data. So continuous attestation is can be achieved through your KPIs and KRIs, the metrics that you would have. Add all of those from SOC into the masters. This way, in your monthly review from domain perspective or your review cycles, which could be quarterly, half yearly, annually, do have this added up proactively. So you know you don't have to run at the last minute to check whether you are in compliance. You have real time data with you. The next smarter thing would be to align your SOC requirements with your other processes. Harmonize, example, the ISO or the GDPR or the NIST, whatever controls that you have pulled in from all the other regulations. You can get these also aligned in. Yes, do a mapping that these are the controls specifically for SOC, or these are the controls which are applicable for GDPR, NIST, ISO, and SOC. So this way, when a SOC specific query comes in, you can pull the table and share the required details, the documentation, the process flow, the risks, the controls, and the associated metrics and the data. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So harmonization helps you in bringing in efficiency. SOC report may be expanded to cover AI governance. Now this is something which is on the play. So bring in your AI governance team if you have. If not, you would, because the way the industry is moving, this is a topic which is getting active. It's already active in many large organizations. So having this upfront should help you. So in simple language, you can say SOC report might become a continuous need instead of a yearly exercise. Do note, it is not a coincidence that you might get it every month, week, maybe. If you are a global company, presence in multiple locations across the globe, a regulator in that country might ask you for a report. I was part of an organization which was present in 60 plus countries. Now, just pure maths, if one country regulator asks for the data once in a year, that means in 52 weeks I have 60 countries, which means every week I might be required to provide the SOC report. So it is not a big or a surprise item. Having SOC and its data and its metrics and its documentation available any given point of time was the need of the hour. So if you are an organization who is planning to go global, please factor this requirement in your planning stages. You would have to play the role or the by the rules of the local regulator in that country, and there would be many other local rules and regulations, SOC being one of them. So I think expecting that you would do once in a year should suffice. What if one regulator comes to you in January and another July? Would you do a retest because they would want a fresh data? So having said that, the best way is keeping all of your requirements in one place, harmonized with your existing framework, clear marking on which are the controls which are applicable for SOC, and pulling the report as and when it is required to. You don't have to struggle through. If you are able to pull it any time of the day, you are not investing extra time and energy. Because if you are not, just think through the amount of people and the resources you'll have to pull out of your operations to gather this information. That's not a good governance model. So this is more of a heads up. You can plan your strategies accordingly. Let's now look at checklist for SOC 1 implementation. or a service provider. Let's do the planning and scoping part. The first thing is to determine the need for SOC 1, whether you confirm your service impacts clients' financial reporting. If the answer is yes, which in this case whether you are dealing with payroll processing, billing platform, transaction recording, then you need a SOC 1. But if you are not, then shouldn't be in your scope. Defining the scope is important. So once you are clear that you are or your services are going to impact clients' financial reporting, the next thing is you have to identify which systems are currently playing the role to support this reporting, which applications are supporting this, which processes are involved in supporting this, locations. The whole idea here is step one. First is, are you in any way impacting your client's financial reporting? If the answer is yes, only then you go to the second part. So in your checklist, you can cut the defining the scope into systems, application, process, location, etc. And all of these would be tied to the first part. So for students, the simple logic should be, yes, my services impact financial reporting, and it impacts because I am using these applications. These applications are hosted on these systems. These are the processes that are used for this reporting. These are the processes used by these applications. These are the processes followed by the systems. These are the places where the systems are hosted. These are how the whole business of providing the services are done. That comes in defining the scope. So it's a full mapping. Think through, you have an auditor who's coming and reviewing your SOC 1. This is a question that he will ask you. Of course, you would know the first part, whether you need it or not, because that is the reason why they would have come in the first place. But if they landed up your place, the first part would have been clear. But you should be very sure before even anything starts off, because there's a cost involved here. You shouldn't jump in assuming that you are required to have a SOC 1. If it is not, come out of it. But if it is, then you have to be ready with the queries which will come in and part of your process. The next is, document whether any third parties are involved to perform these services. So one is, of course, you have your systems, there are applications running on the system, there are processes that you follow. But are these your processes, your system, your application, or are these from your vendor or third party, or is it shared? In any combination, you would need to ensure that all of the bells and whistles are in place. So define whether to use the inclusive or carve out method, wherein which one of the processes are managed by you, which are managed by a vendor, which is managed at what level. A process might have 10 steps, 5 might be followed by you and the rest would transition to your vendor, or a vendor would process the first few steps and then pass on to you. In such cases, you need to be very clear what part of the process by vendor and what are the controls you are expected to follow and your vendor is supposed to follow. And how do you know that it has been followed? This is the breakup that you need to have, the clarity that you need to have in your analysis and preparation. The next is to appoint an internal team or GRC lead responsible for manage the SOC 1 project. Treat it as a project, because that's how time consuming this could be, a focused activity. Generally, the way it can be managed out, you can have your regulatory vertical or a horizontal based on your organization structure who manages SOC across the globe. And then you can have subsections managing in a country or a region or so on and so forth. This should help you best use your resources. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, Recommended to have a external vendor, an auditor who could do your pre-audit assessment, review, find the gaps. So this will cut down the time and effort because he would be a specialist. He knows what he's doing. He knows what to look out for. He can look at the specific indicators of processes which are broken or working. He can easily identify because that would be his specialization. Get a specialist into this. That will cut down your time and resources. So that's the checklist. Use this to build your thought process. Make the list, review it before even getting your auditor in. Once you have these in place, or if you think you don't have these resources in any form and shape within your organization, then get these from the vendor or the auditor that you are planning to select. These are things which should be there with you. Let's now look at the risk and control assessment aspect. The first thing is to identify your control objective. Define the control objective relevant to financial reporting. Now, once you know your services are requiring to ensure SOC 1 compliance, you know the processes which supports it, you know the infrastructure, you know the vendor and things like that, all the details, bells and whistles that which works to provide the services. You need to have controls, and what are the objectives of those controls? Objective is clear. You need to be SOC compliant, and what does it mean has to be articulated. Example, accuracy of transaction, recording, user access control. How you would be able to demonstrate to an auditor or regulator that you have all of these in control. Requires demonstration to metrics, defining through a metrics, defining through your risk indicators, your control indicators, your KPIs. This is where it come into play. Hence, get your risk managers and your control specialists into the game. Let them review, let them break it up, let them define and come to conclusions for each control, sub controls. What are the metrics, what are the indicators that would be required to be in place? Perform risk assessment. Identify the risks that could impact your control objective. Consider fraud, system failures, human errors. Now this is specialized field. This is something which a risk manager is required to know. If he's a good risk manager, he would know it. If you find your risk manager struggling to figure out, then you have to rethink the role that you have assigned him. Hence, recommended to get a specialist here, because only a specialist will be able to get you the maximum coverage. Otherwise, it would be trial and error, trial at the cost of the organization. If he makes an error, you are the one who are paying the penalty, not the risk managers. It's too late in the game if that happens. Next is mapping the existing controls. Now, we discussed this earlier also. You would already have controls. If you are running a business for long, you would have controls. You might not know there is a control. This is called a control. But that's where your risk managers come into play. Your control specialist comes into play, who can look at a process and say, hey, this is the control. This is the place where I can get the information whether the control is working. This is the indicator. This is a performance indicator. This is a risk indicator. So this should be an easy win, provided you have the right risk managers playing their role, who understand SOC. Now, do take a note. A good risk manager doesn't mean that he is a SOC expert. So, train your risk managers to think from a SOC perspective. It's not a given. Not every risk manager would have worked in SOC or understand SOCs. So, I think that investment of time and energy will save a lot for the organization. Be blunt. Have a conversation with a risk manager or a control expert to know whether he has his hands on SOC space. Do not assume every risk manager would know it by default. It doesn't work that way. The next is from control design and documentation perspective. Develop control description. Write clear descriptions of each controls, including who's performing it, how often, and what the tool being used. This is typical control's role. This is a space which the control team should thrive on. It is not a surprise space. A controls expert would know about this, is expected to know about this, a given. So each controls would have its description, it would have the frequency, it should be able to tell you what is okay, what's not okay, what is the threshold. It would be mixed with, or it would combine itself with the risk indicators. This is how it will work. Hence, your risk team and a control team should be able to speak to each other. Generally, they do. Generally, they are almost the same team or in combination. But if not, then you have trouble. Document the system. Create a system description to explain the service provided, key components, and related environment. Now, this generally I would recommend to have this in your asset management space. If you remember, or if you have gone through my IT asset management videos, that is where you will have attributes. This is where the attributes will fall in. If a particular asset or application or a business requires its presence in the implementation of the services which qualifies for SOC, then you should have that tagged in the inventory asset management database, so that when you filter out SOC, you'll know which are the assets are playing a role in some form and shape. So for the audience who are interested in that, you can look at my IT asset management videos. That should help you in some way. Next is specify the controls your client must have in place to ensure effectiveness of your services. Now here the client is your vendor. You have to define, not the vendor. You have to tell the vendor, hey, these are the things that I need. These are the information that I would need periodically, maybe weekly, monthly. These are the things that I would need real time. I should be able to see these metrics. I should be able to see your controls. I should be able to see how the controls are working. So you have to define the controls for your vendors. You should be able to define the controls that the third party vendor are supposed to perform. You have to know how they are monitoring them. So hope this checklist helps you at this point of time. Hope you have clarity of thought here. You can take a pause on the screen and take a snapshot. You can convert these into your own checklist, figure out what question and thought process that you would like to build on. The next is on remediation and readiness. Conduct a readiness assessment. Perform a mock audit to identify gaps or weaknesses before the official audit. Now, there are a couple of ways of doing it. One is you bring in an external who will perform an audit at a particular frequency much before the actual audit, maybe a couple of months before. Or you can have your internal team who is designed, who have specialization to perform these audits. But the best one that I recommend always is to get all of the gaps and processes reviewed, identify the gaps if there are any, trigger off or define and design your controls, put your metrics in place, put your risk indicators in place, and then once you have these are the smallest granular nut and bolts that can be there in the process, and track it on a monthly basis. Track it as part of your monthly review of your metrics. This should give you a broad indication whether you are in compliance. So that maturity needs to be built in the organization. So you have a top level process. The processes have sub processes. The sub processes have controls, which means how you know whether the process is working. That controls would have metrics. That metrics should be reported on a regular basis, if possible real time, and you should have a mechanism that you are reviewing it, or you have a mechanism which alerts you when those metrics deviate. Imagine you have this situation or systems in place, you would know if there is a deviation which can impact your SOC 1. No surprise here. In such case, that's a very good, a very high level of maturity that you are able to demonstrate. If that is the case, then doing a mock audit would be looking at all the metrics and the numbers, and you know whether you are in place or not. Then your pre-audit, if you want to do it, it's optional. But then when the auditor comes in, throwing these numbers in front of the auditor, showing them the documentation that is the primary, showing them the controls, showing them the underlying metrics, should bring in quick results for you. Unless, of course, the auditor is able to find a process gap which you couldn't. Then you have to think through, of course, build a new control or refine your controls, or think through what went wrong when you are in your pre-assessment. So that's how the thought process should be when you are getting your checklist in place. These are best practices in risk management. These are not just SOC, this is across anything that you do in your organization from a risk management perspective. A mature risk manager or management team should be able to address this proactively way before even you start a journey for SOC. You should be able to get this upfront. The other important aspect is training the staff, educating the employee on their roles in control execution and evidence collection. This is a challenge because if the staff is not from risk management space or from control space, you would always have resistance. But that's where the tone from the top helps in. So while you can educate on the roles and responsibilities and the way they are working, the recommended is to automate as much as possible so you are not dependent on a human as much as possible. More importantly, educating them from the risk of failures or risk of not following the recommended process should be very clear, so there is no way an employee comes and say I never knew about it. You have to take that aspect out of the equation. There shouldn't be a situation where anyone comes and say I did not know we had to do this. So hence document it, ensure there is a training, ensure there is an awareness on what is expected from them from a SOC perspective or from a compliance perspective, but should be very clear, and there should be repercussions if these things are not in place. The expectation should be very clear. Now let's look at from a top view for choosing SOC 1 type or type 1 or type 2. Type 1 is to test the design of the control at a specific point of time. Do remember, in this case type 1 is design. Type 2 is about testing both the design and the operating effectiveness. So the idea here is to find what was designed or what's documented that says this is your process. Type 2 is where you go in and check and test the process. What you said and what you do, are they matching? The next is evidence collection. For type 2, you need to prepare evidence, that is supporting one which can support the design. It says that hey, here is the evidence, here is the number, here is the metrics which supports the original design. How do you do that? Metrics is, as I mentioned earlier, is a sure shot winner. Then you have logs, reports, screenshot over the review period. These are critical, super critical. It shouldn't be a case your word against mine. If that is the situation, then it is simply a case of not having the real thing on the ground. You failed a type 2. If you fail type 2, there is no way a type 1 works, because how do you prove that type 1 the design is there? It's only verbal, it's only paper. From an external audit execution perspective, the checklist would have documentation, where is submitting system description, control metrics, evidence, policies and procedures. I would recommend anyone who is implementing SOC and looking at this video for finding an idea, you can break the description into each line items. Work with the auditors during walkthroughs, interviews and evidence review. During the audit, recommendation is to get this before the audit. Think through what an auditor would ask you from the scope perspective. That should be very clear. If you have an SME, you have a specialist who already worked on SOC, he would know what an auditor is looking out for well in advance. So you can prepare it accordingly. During the audit execution, you have to respond, clarify, response, address. Clarify is the first important step. Do not assume you understood what the auditor is saying. Auditor would ask a question. There is no harm in going back to the auditor asking for clarification. If it is clear enough, you can repeat it just to be sure that there is no deviation. Supporting documents are mandatory. Otherwise, it's again a set of interpretation, your word against mine. And in an audit, the auditor's interpretation matters. If you want to counter it, you need to support it with some evidence, a clear evidence, in fact. Now, during the process of SOC testing, you have to review the draft SOC report. You have to ensure that what the auditor found out or interprets or assumes is in line with what you think. Ensure the description, the auditor's findings are accurate and well represented. It covers what you have on the ground or what you know. Of course, you will have to substantiate it. The next is, if there is a gap, then there is develop an action plan for exceptions or issue noted by the auditor. You need to have a plan as to how do you fix it. The plan should also be fixed in terms of the timeline by when you will fix it. It can't be open-ended. And once all this is done, you have to share the final report with your client, prospects, regulators, and for implementation of access control, you have to implement that so that these are only visible or available to authorized staffs. Now, post an audit is over, you need to conduct a lesson learned meeting, which is a post review. Review what went well, what can improve, update internal documentation. That updating internal documentation arises from your review. What worked, you would not like to change it. If it's working, do not touch unless you have a great idea which can improve it further. But definitely, those which are found to be a gap need to be revisited. Bring in your SMEs, bring in your risk guys, bring in your control team, so that you can get those process improved. And once you do that, once you identify, document it before you start implementing it. Plan for reassessment. Schedule the next cycle. If it has found in the first review there are gaps, have a fixed timeline so that you can revisit and fix it at the court. Do remember, the moment you have a finding on a SOC 2, you have to report to a regulator. The regulator would have anxious within them or anxiety within them. It's your duty to ensure that the regulator knows that you are on top of it and you have fixed it. This would help with for getting that confidence back. No one likes a red mark on your report. So you need to have those in place. Hence, lesson learned meeting are critical. Plan for a reassessment. The earlier the better. So fix your gaps immediately. Use audit finding to improve your operational efficiency, documentation, risk monitoring, and sometimes use this audit report, and it can be used to inform the senior management. Sometimes the senior management might not agree that there is a problem unless and until they are hit with a regulatory report. If that is the maturity of the senior management, so be it. In that case, it's a big hammer that a regulator comes hitting us. Unfortunate, but if that is how the voices are heard, so be it. Let's do a quick checklist. So the flow would be: define the scope, systems, and sub-service organization, that is the vendors and the sub-vendors. Perform your risk assessment and control assessment. Do remember, risk assessment and control assessment are two different aspects. So get your professionals in each space to do the review. Document systems description and internal control. Documentation is your key. Not having a documentation is a guarantee of failing the type 1. Because in type 1, it's your design. And where is the design? It's in a document. And you don't have a document, you are dead there itself. So get the documentation in the right order in place if you ever want to reach the full audit. The next is conduct the readiness assessment and fix the gap if there are any. Choose between type 1, type 2. Gather evidence for auditors testing. When you say gather, during an audit, you need to gather because there would be a specific time frame they would ask. But if your metrics are already in place and matured, these should be available any given point of time from your repository. Review and finalize the SOC 1 report and remediate any audit finding and plan the next steps. So this is a top level summary. You can take a screenshot of this and check against your checklist and plan out your strategy. We will conclude this part 1 of the SOC videos. While we covered the topics as shown in the screen, part 2 would be focused on the checklist for each items that we discussed. While we did review few checklists in this part 1, part 2 would be going deeper into the subject from a checklist perspective. The intention of part 2 would be to help the domains, whether you are a student or an expert, a professional focused on SOC, to take cues from the checklist and build your specific domain checklist that should help you getting in compliance for SOC. So I hope this has been useful, and I would like to thank you for taking the time out, investing this time into watching this video. This is your host Savit Vittal Salian. See you in part 2.